Ross, thank you very much for coming to talk to us today about your very interesting and productive career. You've been responsible for quite a lot of safety and standards initiatives, which I'd like to talk about today, but let's start by talking about how you got into anaesthesia in the first place.
Well, I was an intern in St Vincent's Hospital, Sydney, in 1952. And as a junior resident, as they used to be called in those days, one term that I did had an anaesthetic component. And I thought this was great. You know, all these gadgets, which they were in those days, because most of the anaesthetics that were given back then was just a so-called rag and bottle. But they had machines, and I chose to use a McKesson. And that's, I guess, really what intrigued me, was the ability to use this technology. But when I got to Lidcombe and found that they had a Centinese, I thought, gee, this is all right. And then I asked for the laryngoscope, and the only one they had was a Chevalier Jackson.
Really?
Yeah, and I put my first tubes in Lidcombe with a Chevalier Jackson laryngoscope. It's possible to do that, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in 1960, you were responsible for the formation of the Special Committee investigating deaths under anaesthesia.
Correct. Yes.
And tell me how that came about.
Well, in those days, the only investigation, if you could call it that, of a patient who died during anaesthesia was done by the coroner. You know, nobody was to blame or had been responsible, except for the patient, of course. The patient was the one who really had let the whole team down because they'd had the inconvenience caused by dying during the anaesthesia. The trouble was, of course, that that was interpreted by the medical community as being cases or patients who died in the operating theatre. Whereas, of course, as we know now, that often doesn't happen. It happens later on or after they've left the operating room. And I persuaded the committee to request the coroners to extend their jurisdiction to the first 24 hours. That was the origin of the 24-hour rule.
And how did the medical community take it? Did they see it as a witch hunt?
No, they were most cooperative. And after a year, I wrote to all of the anaesthetists who'd submitted their case for evaluation, and I asked them what difference it had made to their practice. Half of them wrote back and said, I don't give anaesthetics anymore. And they had been general practitioners who were expected to be able to give an anaesthetic and set a fracture and deliver a baby because of what they'd been taught in medical school. But that doesn't apply to anaesthesia, of course. What they don't teach you or didn't teach you in those days, was how to give an anaesthetic to somebody who has just lost a bucket of blood or whatever. So I took out of the system quite a number of people who shouldn't have been giving anaesthetics anyway, but they were doing what they thought they were expected to do.
So you did publish from your committee as well?
Yes, we did it on a number of occasions as we accumulated more data. The longest and most detailed study was the one that was published in BJA in 1987, I think, or sometime like that. That was by now the results of something like 20 years of investigations.
And it's still going?
From 62 to 84. And that was pretty definitive, really.
And you also got involved in standards committees as a result, I guess.
Yes, and it was interesting work, actually. It wasn't the least bit dull. I was on the committee for standardisation of syringes, which meant that we eventually abolished those syringes that were marked in units and standardised a syringe. And in no time, just about everybody had converted to the Luer fitting and record and anything else in the mating of two components to one another ended up in museums.
So back when you were at Lidcombe, you did go to Vietnam at some stage?
Yes, we were in a very quiet part of the country.
It wasn't part of the military operation?
Oh, no, it wasn't a military outfit. It was a purely civilian team.
What was the purpose of your mission in...
Oh, well, I was the anaesthetist to the team, and part of my duties was to teach the locals, who were nurses, you see, and I did manage to show them how to do low spinals, and they were quite good at it.
What local anaesthetic were you using?
it was heavy Novocaine, and these were only being done for TURs, and so there was no need for a high spinal. They used to do it with them sitting up, and it gives perfect conditions, of course.
Can we just finish up by talking about the special committee investigating deaths, where it's at now and what you think its role is in the future?
Well, we don't see the same cases now that we used to. You know, they're all older, sicker, and they're usually suffering from some really unpleasant surgical problem, particularly the vascular cases. And I must say we do see some patients having futile surgery. That was not something that we saw to begin with, but how you equip our graduates, our fellows, with the ability to say no. When you're new to the business, of course, that's a very difficult thing to do. You've got to persuade a surgeon who's already said that he's going to operate to not do so. That on reconsideration, we think the best thing we can do for Grandma is to keep her comfortable.
It's certainly something that occupies a lot of us in clinical practice now. Do you think this committee has any sort of reporting line that would help?
I do. It's early days yet, but I know that my colleagues on the committee are as of one mind when it comes to this kind of thing, but they haven't yet decided where to go next. So that's a work in progress.
Yeah.
I end my last term on the committee in August.
Do you?
Yeah.
So how
I've
many
been a
years
member
have
since 1960.
So how many? That's 53.
It's half a lifetime, isn't it?
Yeah.
More than half a lifetime.
Well, you've done a wonderful job, Ross, and I'm very grateful to you for coming to us today to tell us about all of these experiences.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that, and I'm very grateful to you for asking me to appear.
Good.
I enjoyed it.
Good.